time I Googled a certain question, I get a different answer. So there was none of them ever seemed to line up. And 3, what difference does it make? What's the point of us being analytical about this whole thing? Really? I could throw up, as I said, bar graphs, pie charts, etc. And what difference would it make? What this is an Englishman, an Irishman, and a Scotsman walked into a bar, and they talked about basically what the future of Irish, or what the Irish whiskey, what the future of whiskey holds. Is it sustainable? None of us have a crystal ball. All right, let's make that very clear. This is opinionated. This is us being opinionated. 3 grumpy men sitting in this live stream together, being opinionated about this thing. Only ever an opinion. Yes, there probably will be facts thrown out there. Yes, I would imagine there'll be facts thrown out there. But most of it is based on what we've seen, what we're seeing coming, etc. So let's, as I say, not dwell too much on the over-analysis of the thing. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to do what I usually do, dip into the lounge, have a quick look around. So if we're in the bar, I'm just going to walk around the rest of the tables and see what everybody else is talking about. And then we'll get going, just to see who's in. Donner past Tim, just heading off to work, but it's good to see David Owen, Pete Head, Frank should have been at work, but now he's here. Lachlan McKenzie. The thing is, there's going to be a few new names to me and to my live streams in here, probably because these are people who would maybe generally tune in to Vin or Ralfy, or guests. I'm not giving away who my guests are because it was on the great big banner. Charlie Holmes, Tim Hawkstra, good to see you guys. Let me see, Rick Johnson, Rob Smith, Rick Johnson again, yes. And what we'll do is, the whiskey friend Alan, good to see you, Alan, haven't seen you in ages. As these pop up, I'll do my best to get into the chat. Whiskey and Wine Trails, Tom, how are you, my friend? Des, Cool Runnings. So there's plenty of people in the chat. That's good. That's good. I'm having a little Wetner, as I like to have, over the years. And there's my friend Richard Weber in, and Jeff Whiskey. Here we go. I'm going to bring both my guests in at the same time. As I said, there was no secret about who these guys were, and we'll kick this off. So, Vin and Ralfy, good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
You're both well?
Wonderfully well. And by the way, feeling grumpy, so let's go for it.
Do you know, I didn't even realize that I had this persona of grumpiness until somebody else spotted it, and then I don't know whether I'm wearing it like a badge or whether I am just naturally grumpy. I think it's probably the latter. My father, I take it from my father. My father's nickname, my father's name was Billy or Willie or whatever you want to call him. But in one of his last jobs, they must have been up all night about this one, but they called him Thran Willie. Now, the word Thran, you would probably understand, Ralphie. I don't know,
Yes.
Ben, whether you know the word Thran or not. It's basically just thick-tempered and grumpy. So that was his nickname, Thran Willie. And so I got it from him. I'll blame him. Anyway, gentlemen, thank you for joining me. It's a meaty subject. The future of whiskey, is it sustainable? As I said in the build-up to you guys before we went live, this could be a two-parter. You never know. But before we start, I'm just going to have a little dram, or certainly start one anyway, and say, cheers, gentlemen.
Cheers, yes.
Cheers.
Let the conversation flow.
Now, Ralphie, there's a reason I asked you in. I'm not going to be cheeky about this. As I mentioned,
please be cheeky. It's always more entertaining.
As I said to you privately, you're a gentleman of a certain age, like myself.
Yes, I definitely am. And it shows, and I don't care.
So, with that in mind, you've been around the block already, but you've been around the block in whiskey a lot longer than the rest of us. You've been around on YouTube a hell of a lot longer than the rest of us. I think whenever it comes to a history of whiskey,
Mm-hmm.
you're generally the first person I think of, and that was why you were the first person I thought of when I thought of asking a guest in. You would remember a time, like myself, when whiskey was a pint and a half, and that when you went to the bar, it was a glass that looked nothing like this, and there would have been a lot more whiskey in it, and it was a way to get you drunk that little bit quicker.
Yes.
Did you, and this is quite an easy question straight off, did you ever see a future then where whiskey was treated in the way that we treat it now? We hold it in this ridiculously high respect sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting question, because in the old days, let's go back to the 1980s. The landscape wasn't just a bit different, it was phenomenally different. And there wasn't even that many specialist shops, whiskey shops. They were few and far between. It was perfectly common for hill walkers or folk over for a bit of shooting and fishing to just roll up at a distillery and just buy over the door, either a small cask or a refill of a bottle. And that was normal then. Visiting a distillery was a relatively, it was very unusual. Glenfiddich really kicked it off with formal visitor centres. And of course, they were the first whiskey company to actually use cardboard tubes to up level the degree of presentation. Just something that they continue to do today with relative effectiveness, so much so that many other whiskey producers have adopted the same formula. But back in the 80s, it was really 1987 that I'm standing in a bar. I've got over my dark rum and tonic habit. And by the way, it wasn't a bad habit, because the quality of British bottled blended rums was really quite high from OVD and Woods and Lamb's Navy. It was really good stuff, far superior to the generic fare that, I'm being polite about this. Okay, some of the rubbish that's getting bottled at this moment in time, because even then, people didn't have a lot of options for luxuries. So people would stop and they would smell and they would taste, because they just paid a good swodge of their money and it was their main night out of the week. There was none of this, you're stopping for a carry out and you're guaranteed a taxi home. People would walk home for several miles. And that was, even in the 1980s, that was the situation. The height of fashion at that moment in time was vodka and tomato juice, the Bloody Mary, and of course, Baby Sham. You might remember that one, Jim.
Why?
Yes. Heavily advertised, and also occasionally Campari and other assorted generic vermouths. But folk would go into particularly men, older men, would go into the bar, they'd get a half and a half pint, they'd have a pint or two, and then they'd want to just kind of speed things up a little bit, because they didn't have to converse with their friends or enemies anymore. So they'd have just whatever the bar was selling off the gantry that was the cheapest whiskey, and they'd have it neat, side by side with the beer, and the taste of the beer would generally just dilute the coarseness or the youthfulness of the whiskey. And in Glasgow, the whiskey of choice was High Commissioner, produced by Loch Lomond Distillery. And I have to say, in those days, it was really good stuff. It was a genuine depth of flavour, and the sensation range just actually pushed into the savoury notes. And it was really in the 1990s that it started to get very mixed batches from High Commissioner, if you dared to buy it. But single malts were, if you're a blue-collar worker, if you're a plumber and a joiner, and your client was happy with the job, they'd give you a bottle of Bell's. And if you were an office worker, you'd be given a bottle of Glenfiddich. If you were a lawyer, if you were the doctor, you'd be given a bottle of Famous Grouse. But if you were the lawyer, you'd be given a bottle of Macallan. And that was the pecking order in the relatively few prominent single malts that existed. Now, I only wish at that time I'd gone and spent more time at a Cadenhead's shop, because they had literally all basically that cheapen the sales, because many distilleries shut in 1983. So they were offloading their stock to empty their warehouses. So you've got Northport, you've got Glenlochy, you've got Millburn, you've got these highly desirable and sought after collectible whiskies now. And naturally, when they get the casks into the warehouse at Cadenhead's or Gordon and MacPhail, at that point, it was the person on the floor that basically was left to get on with the decision. So they'd say, well, people won't know that name. So the only advertising that even exists is people talking about it. So we better bottle the better versions first. And you never saw any sort of premiumization until Port Ellen got discovered. And that was in the early 90s that Port Ellen really became a thing. You found these, I mean, by 1989, 1990, I could go into an Oddbins, which was stocking a larger range of obscure single malts, simply because people were just beginning to buy them. You could get Gordon MacPhail or Berry Brothers and Rudd, Glen Grant's, 32, 35, 36-year-old for £80 a bottle. I was buying Brora for £84 original 30-year-old Brora, £84 a bottle. At that point, the Black Bowmores, the first edition, which is superb. The others are, they're okay, but they get hyped. By the way, I just want to mention this, that there's a huge nostalgia thing about old whiskies perpetuated by the in-house whiskey snobs, that all the whiskies were better in the old days. But it's not the case. By some of these Broras from the independent bottlers were very generic and unspectacular. And the rumour was, in fact, that when Diageo in the Rare Malt Selection series did bottle their Broras, they'd actually been matured in ex-Lagavulin casks. Right. And that's what gave them the substance of character. But again, it's very easy because you hear a little bit of this and a bit of that, and I can tell you absolutely categorically, you get enough. At times you get some real BS coming out the industry. They come out with some real bangers, like for example, Rosebank. Someone went in during the night with a big angle grinder and cut up the stills to steal them. Give me a break. Just at the point where the price of copper is crashing. As far as I'm aware, those stills were basically sent to China in a swap.
Seems right.
As part of the navigating, when the big corporate multinationals were basically, before they realized what a difficult time they would have trying to possess and gain leverage in the Chinese market, they really they did not anticipate what they were facing. And that very rarely gets talked about, but this is the benefit of the kind of extended timeline, that it's very easy to maybe nostalgic about it. And I'm sure in 10 years, people will look back at the nostalgia of the situation we're facing right now, where you've got Isle of Arran, you've got Lindoras, you've got Loch Lee, you've got Torrevieja, you've got Ardnamurchan, all these Glenwivis, still underrated and overlooked. These distilleries are putting out excellent whiskey. The only fault they have is they're still young. Their prices are creeping up. But the reason for that is it's harder now for a distillery to survive than it's ever been. The price of yeast has doubled. Grain's gone up 50%. Energy's absolutely skyrocketed. And we won't even deep dive into the bureaucracy that the distilleries have to face with all the planning and regulations and the intensity of health and safety executive visits to the premises. It's just absolutely crippling to just being left alone to run an effective business. Now, I'm going to stop there, guys, and put it back to you.
Well, it was because it was just that you actually left that on a good note there, Ralphie, for the simple fact, and this will let me bring Vin in at this point, because it's a bloody good point. Why would anybody want to start a distillery anymore? I mean, there's enough whiskey out there for all of us, surely. And it doesn't matter. This could come across very wrong. I wasn't actually going to go down this path at a minute, but I will. To say it doesn't matter about the little guys, of course it does. But this is a question that I was already going to put out there, that the multinationals will survive anything. The multinationals will, it doesn't matter what happens next. The Diageos, the Grants, the Pernod Ricards of this world will have something to fall back on no matter what. The smaller ones, I'm thinking more along the lines of Irish whiskey here, and a lot of these new distilleries that have started in Ireland. I'm convinced, utterly convinced, and I hate to say it, that in 10 years' time, a lot of them will not exist. They'll have started, but they'll have folded again because they just won't be able to survive because of A, the multinationals, and B, the demand. Is the demand going to be there? And this is us now. This is the crystal ball moment again, where we're asking the question, the future. This was almost what drove this, the thinking behind this in the first place. Will the demand still be there? Vin, any input?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, as we were saying before we went live, I mean, like, just thinking about the definition of the word sustainability, we can talk about sort of net zero and stuff as much as anyone likes, but the very definition of it is, can we keep doing what we're doing forever, technically? I mean, obviously, no, the heat death of the universe is going to come for us one way or another, but but sustainability now, you're quite right. We're literally about 5 to 10 years away from being absolutely flooded with, as you said, specifically Irish whiskey, with all these new distilleries coming online. Same for English distilleries, new Scottish distilleries coming up all the time. It's a great place to be if you're a whiskey drinker, but are we going to have the same volume of whiskey drinkers in 10, 20, 30 years' time? I said to you earlier, my day job, I work for a university, and I'm acutely aware of all the new trends between the sort of 18 to 25-year-old age category. And I can tell you, they are very health conscious at the moment, extremely health conscious. So, yeah, they might have a drink here and there, but are they going to be hardcore whiskey drinkers by the time they're 35? I don't think so. So, yeah, I mean, we're in a bit of a weird point now where obviously we'll all, God willing, still be around. So we'll still be drinking all this whiskey. And it's a hard thing to try and convince people to join to drink whiskey, because we're basically convincing them to get into a terrible habit. But yeah, sustainability means a whole lot of things to different people. So will people be drinking all that volume of whiskey, or will it just be us three and the people watching just absolutely dousing themselves in all of this, hopefully cheap whiskey, which is something I think Ralfie mentioned earlier as well about the price. But
you see, that's the thing, because and I'm not saying, I say this, and I don't, when I say it, I don't say it with, maybe it doesn't come across right, when I say that whiskey producers aren't making whiskey for us. The Bushmills of this world, because it's easier to say this in Ireland, where a blend is technically coming from a distillery rather than from 5 distilleries being jammed together in your Johnny Walker style, But even though the grain element of Bushmills doesn't come from Bushmills, but anyway, I do say it, and people think, well, no, that's not true. Of course, whiskey's being made for those who like it, but it's the basics that are making these distilleries, or the big names, their money. Surely, it's Johnny Walker that's making Diageo the money in the whiskey world. As I said, it's Jameson that's making Pernod Ricard their money in the Irish whiskey world. It's the same for Bushmill. It's Jack Daniels that's making Jack Daniels the big thing that it is. It's those basic whiskies that are the ones that are keeping the money coming in for the owners, the people behind them. I just noticed a comment there from Michael Henry. Good to see you, Michael. As a general world trend of moving from blend to single malt drinking, there is still a capacity needed for single malt to replace grain whiskey. Yes. But so here's another one. We'll put a pin in that for now and actually go back to Vin, because we were talking before we went live. That's another thing. How is even, and this is sustainability, is production of barley to the extent that we need it sustainable. There's another crystal ball moment.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is literally, it takes fields and fields and fields of barley to make this product. And obviously that's fine right now. No one's going hungry, but I don't know, let's just chuck a couple of hypotheticals out there. Let's say our population grows like it has been growing worldwide. Eventually we're going to need to feed these people, and they're going to have to start putting that field use to different things, away from luxuries. Again, I'm saying this is a very small percentage, so I'm not saying we all need to start panicking, but when I'm talking about sustainability, I'm not talking about the kind of net zero target of 2040 for Scotch industry. I'm talking about 2050, 2060, 2070. Like Scotland's been making whiskey and Ireland, to be fair, for hundreds of years. Ideally, we'd want that to carry on for a few more 100 years, right? So, you've got to kind of think about stuff like that. So it's, the sustainability of it all, like that. I mean, even to the point of when we're talking about the whiskey they're making today might not get drank for, hopefully 10 years, sometimes younger, but hopefully 10 years, maybe 20 years. And they're trying to forecast for that. Like, will the volume they make today actually be drunk at some point, or does it need to sit in a warehouse until later? All very difficult decisions having to be made, but they've got, some of them have got warehouses and warehouses of stuff that they could release it today if they wanted to, if the market was there, but they've got to think about their future longevity as well. If they're lucky. And some of these newer guys, they don't have that. They have to put things out straight away when they're 3 years old and then backfill that. So it could all come crashing down at any moment, I guess, is the big thing. But if they're not careful, but luckily, I think they are being careful.
Ralfy, any?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll start with Ireland. Ireland faces additional pressures that it has, due to government decisions, has collectively the highest rate of duty in Europe, even exceeding Sweden, which is pretty high. Because although the duty in spirits is slightly less, the duty on wine and beers is more. And Irish distillers face a huge amount of bureaucracy. And they have not yet absolutely nailed their identity as Irish whiskey, as interpreted through bottlings like Green Spot and Redbreast, which is, outside of Ireland, people's definition of Irish whiskey beyond Jameson's and Bushmills, is of your Paddies and Powers and the traditional pot still style. And even now this is confused with some Irish distilleries because they're bottling other people's whiskey under their own name, which wasn't a particularly smart move, to be honest. As regards the sustainability of producing grain and sourcing peat, it's completely sustainable because 11% of the planet's surface is peat bog. Most of Siberia, most of Canada, even in North Africa and Morocco, up in the mountains, you have peat bogs. If it is harvested carefully, in other words, if you don't destroy the surface, the living surface of the peat bog, and you only harvest from deeper down, then it's going to replenish and recover itself, because it's the green surface, the sphagnum moss, and all the other little plants that live in that highly acidic environment that are basically absorbing the carbon. Having said that, we have to be very careful about the applied narratives we are given about the unsustainability of the future for humans, because the planet can't cope with all the food requirements and all the rest of it. That, frankly, at this moment in time, is absolute total nonsense. It has been disproved. And I'd add to that and say the biggest threat is not the global warming. It's from plastic contamination affecting every living thing on the planet. And it's simply not enough of a conversation at the moment. And Vin, you mentioned earlier, and I'm going to spin back to what you mentioned, a younger generation who are very much health conscious. And I'm going to add to that because they're waking up to the fact that the soft energy drinks that they're buying are garbage, are not good for their health. They're also waking up to the fact that they have been successfully weaned since childhood on crunchy nut cornflakes and frozen pizzas, and they're feeling sick and deflated because of the ambient toxicity in highly processed foods. And let's not even deep dive in so-called vegetable oil, which doesn't even come from vegetables. It is highly processed and highly industrialized and frankly toxic commodity in the food market is so-called vegetable oil coming from seeds. It oxidizes very rapidly, and there's a proven link between poor quality seed oil, in other words, superheated when you're frying food, which is a lot of food, and the clogging of the arteries. And then there's the sugar, the amount of sugar. One of the biggest obstacles young people in particular have getting into whiskey is they have great difficulty getting their palate round the sensation of bitterness, sourness, and umami, particularly bitterness, because they are so groomed on sweetness. And I'll give you a brilliant example of this. My brother was over for dinner recently, and he brought me a special treat, because it was discounted, a tub of Ben & Jerry's ice cream. Well, I got 2 spoonfuls in and I couldn't even go any further. It wasn't just sweet, it was hyper sweet. Hyper sweet, because what happens is people on a sweet palate become desensitized. They get used to it, and therefore things have to be even sweeter in order to maintain the addictive consumption. And this is why, Vin, when we go into a gym anywhere, the young men and women, they're off alcohol. Well, one reason is because it doesn't go well with the rather poor quality cocaine they're stuffing up their nose. But hey, that's another conversation for another day. But the fact is that this is a generation who know already they won't have a state pension. They will not have the National Health Service. They will have to pay in the future. And therefore, they're investing in their longevity, their health. And a very easy way of doing that is to avoid bars, which, as we know, there's a lot of bars shutting down globally. It says what's happening in one country is happening slowly in some areas, but rapidly in other areas, in other countries, because we're now comprehensively in a global village. What happens in Berlin today affects Barcelona tomorrow, and what happens in London quickly travels to Lima.
Ralfy, you're not painting a very good future. You're not painting a very good future at the minute there now.
Well, let me paint a good future for you, because there'll always be demand for quality. Quality has its own currency. And I'm very optimistic about single malts and Scotch whisky. Sure, the reputation is being undermined. At times, the industry must look out of the window, well, those that bother to even notice what's happening online, and ask themselves, see these pesky anorex, do they know too much? Are they getting too fussy? It's a situation now that didn't used to exist. People would go to master classes at whiskey festivals, and they would sit patiently and sort of malt worship the expert who was presenting a master class. But times have changed. After a few drams, people are starting to pop up some pretty deep dive questions that experts and brand ambassadors have never had to answer before. And to be honest, at times, they're just not ready for it, but they have to be. The industry generally, and I'm generalizing because it's still dominated by the big brands, they want us as consumers. They want us grazing through travel retail under the bright lights and the stench of 1,000 cheap perfumes wafting down that overlit, overheated corridor, and all the cheap, shitty confectionery they're trying to punt on their captive captive customer before they get on a plane. But your standard blends, walk into any supermarket on a Saturday afternoon, because that's when they're being bought, and just look for the gaps in the shelves, and you'll find the brands are sitting there. It's the supermarket own. If anyone wants a bottle of whiskey, that's what they're buying. And there's nothing wrong with the quality. In fact, it's frequently the case the quality of the own brands is superior to the main brands. And this is the passive consumer picking up on this. They're nowhere near, and this is something that we're directly involved in, is simply sharing our experience and enthusiasm online and greatly accelerating people's overview and knowledge to such an extent that was unfathomable back in the 1980s and 1990s. Malts, they'll always have a market because it's quality, but the producers have to be careful about the prices, and they've got to avoid too much superfluous, disingenuous, condescending theatrics, including non-fungible token association, cryptocurrency references, and basically art installation absurdities, which have got more purpose in Tate Modern than they do in your average specialist whiskey shop.
You see, malt, I was well put, Ralphie, well put. And we super chat there from Highland Hamish. Hamish, cheers, my friend. Greetings from Inverness. I actually had written down, Ralphie, that this is something. I did make notes. They weren't terribly, concise, but that malt is the denim. It'll always be in fashion in some shape or form. This is the thing. And this actually sort of leads me on to another thing that I was thinking about while you were saying it there, that if you're starting a distillery, which is, as I said a while ago, I think personally, I feel for anybody starting a distillery at the moment, for the simple fact that there are just so many. I mean, you may have thought that you were lined up to be the next big thing, and then 3 distilleries open next door to you before you even realized. Malt, yes, is that denim. It's in fashion all the time in some shape or form. What do you, as a new distillery, do to make yourself noticeable to so somebody asked that question in the chat earlier. I can't remember who it was. I noticed it at the corner of my eye. Will these distilleries that I was saying earlier on, I can't see these distilleries existing. Will they close down or will they be bought up? Well, who's going to buy them up? Diageo isn't interested in somebody that's not making the money. Grant's, Pernod Ricard, etc., etc. They're not interested. They're looking at the distilleries that are going to make them money down the road. Vin, if you're a new distillery, if you're new to the whiskey world, you've went in there, you've thought you're going to be the next big thing. What can they do to make themselves stand out from the crowd?
Well, I mean, you look at like English whiskies are probably a good example of this one, because they're having to fight for their lives all the time. So, I mean, you can either do something like what Cotswolds did, and that's introduce, really go heavy on like STR casks and try and do something to make really flavorful whiskey much sooner, and then sell it for a low price if you can. Not everyone can do that. Or you can go down the road of appealing to the kind of, the FOMO people, where you release very, very limited quantities of special releases, try and get that buzz going, make you want to, like Bimber's probably a good example. I don't think they did that on purpose. Maybe they did, but it just, good quality liquid started coming out of there, and then it started disappearing really quickly, and then people suddenly want it more, blah, blah, blah. Or you can go like Lakes Distillery and you can get someone like Darvel Gandhi on board. He's now left again, but he's the ex-Macallan whiskey maker. You get him on board and try and make some really fancy stuff. Try and position yourself as a super premium brand. Although we all know that they recently had to sell, so they were in a bit of debt. So that's a scary thought. They did all right. They came out of it to the side, but the fact that a distillery so soon after opening, forgetting how long they've been open now, 2015, something like that. So 10 years. already having to be sold to a larger thing. So that's a worrying look at the future. But yeah, the point I'm making there is it's really challenging. You have to try and stand out amongst these big boys. The one benefit I think we've got is that a lot of the older Scottish distilleries really haven't got their grasp on social media yet. Even still, they're hundreds of years old, so they've been doing things the way they've been doing them over and over again. They've got marketing teams that know what they're doing, but sometimes they can't push against the owners or whatever. And some of these new guys have really got their handle on social media marketing. They can get their name out there really quickly for very little budget through people like us, so it's handy for them. And I don't know about you guys, but once I've covered a bottle, I don't really go back to it. So once I've covered the core range of Highland Park, I'm not covering Highland Park anymore. So it's gone. But I suppose you could really talk about it for ages, but trying something different, I think, is the important part, especially when you're not governed by rules. Go on.
No, I was actually going to say that even being different now isn't easy.
No.
What do you do to be different? Because generally, as far as I can see it, and anybody's trying to do, somebody's been there and done it before. As a matter of fact, I find myself saying it over and over again now. If you're going to be different, be off the wall different. Be completely balls out different. Do something mad that nobody has ever done before, and it happens once in a blue moon. Why not try being the same but better? And I mean, their name will probably come up quite a bit at the minute, but Ardnahoe are a good example of that. There's a distillery not breaking molds. They didn't try to break any molds. They didn't try to do anything that was different. Yet again, I look at that and go, fantastic stuff. I just happen to have the bottle sitting beside me. I think it's fantastic whiskey. However, where do these guys go in the future? So what do they do next that's going to be different for them, that's different from anybody else? Now, it's all right. I find myself looking at some of these newer distilleries, younger distilleries, and the money's coming from a much higher place. And so the sustainability was there already for the project in itself. There's a new distillery will be opening in Ireland very soon, and their main benefactor is a very famous rock star, one of the most famous rock stars in the world. When that is your benefactor, you can afford to wait. You can afford to hemorrhage money, which is what, let's face it, these guys were doing pretty much for their life. They were hemorrhaging money, remembering that Hunter Lang weren't sitting quiet. They were still independently bottling, etc. But this is me leading on basically to, this is one of the things that concerns me about the sustainability. I had a message from Ryan Sutherland from 8 Doors saying much the same thing. He sort of said, well, look, when we're small enough, we never, what I'm going to say, I'll not read his message out verbatim, but what I took out of what he was saying was that when you sort of fly under the radar anyway, they're almost making a product aimed at people like us. They're not making a product aimed at the mass market because they haven't got a big enough process to aim a product at the mass market. So that would almost lead me on to, because this, I'm convinced, was made for enthusiasts. This isn't made for the mass market. This isn't made for consumers, technically, which, I mean, if you said that to anybody else, if it's not made for consumers, who is it made for? Obviously it's made for somebody to drink. But so there's always, to me, there could always be this level, well, there always will be this level that lies even below the second level down. And these distilleries that are small process producing whiskey for you and I, and let's face it, everybody in the chat. Ralfy?
Right. So, well, I'll come back to English whiskey, because it's been fascinating to watch that. And the way that it's kind of evolved from the English Whiskey Company in Norfolk, really kicking things off with, in my opinion, some very...
You can say it. It was rubbish. It was rubbish when it first came out.
By the way, this isn't unusual because when Arran first came out, they had some pretty dreadful non-age statement bottles. And this brings us around to the fact that every distillery that starts from scratch needs to find its feet. It needs to tweak and tuck work in progress, and as quickly as possible, ideally with the benefit of someone with experience in the industry who's not charging them too much for the privilege, to actually get the singularity of their identity. And that's primarily through what comes out the stills. There's no doubt about it that it doesn't matter which country your whiskey's in. The emphasis now is on more flavour and more sensation range. The sensation range, not so much sweet, but certainly perhaps sweet and sour, aromatic, the little higher level of bitterness, and savoury it never goes wrong. People are discovering Edradour, Mortlach, and of course the likes of Springbank and Kilkerran, because it's confident in delivering savoury notes, so that more experienced a palate gets, which is considerably, unprecedentedly experienced in your modern malt mate and whiskey enthusiast. The sheer diversity and volume of what they're consuming over a relatively short space of time. And therefore, certainly being Scottish, I'm looking at English whiskey thinking, that's interesting. What's going to come out? What is the identity going to be? And it really was Cotswolds Distillery that actually was the first one to successfully nail it. Filey Bay has had its moments as well, despite its unpromising location. But the problem with lakes is too pricey and too pretentious, too soon. They're trying to run too fast before they even got up to walking pace. Whiskey distillery reputation, when your marketing is only part of something much larger and more important, and that is original messaging. And it's not so much what you impose, like the corporate multinationals impose the banality of that onto the passive consumer who needs that because they're super saturated and so on all media by this continuous repetitive message of just consume, shut up and consume and pay and don't think about it. But for the whiskey drinker, the more sophisticated whiskey customer, as I like to refer to them, the distilleries have to play a game of chess and not checkers. It's more sophisticated than that. What advice would I give any distillery? Go and visit Springbank, spend a day there, full day. Then when you've done that, go to Ardnamurchan. Feel the place. Feel the actual tone and the temperament. Why is Ardnamurchan doing so well so soon? Obviously, first glaring illustrative example is the first release was a little bit older than the average being put out by new distilleries. And it was at a fair and square price, and there was plenty of it. There was none of this inaugural bottling pretentiousness at absurdly high prices, which is frankly turning into a reputation killer. The customer adapts far more quickly to the shortcomings in the pretensions and illusions that distillers may create from themselves because they're in their little whiskey distillery bubble and they think they're unique and they think that their singularity is so wonderful and they're all full of passion for this project and all the rest of it. That's not strong currency anymore. Silence is strong currency. We saw this to a certain extent with Loch Lee keeping its candle well under a shelter until they put out their first bottlings. Granted, quite young, granted. Some recent bottlings have been considerably more expensive. They have to be aware of that, the fine-tuning that's required for the modern, highly observational market. And therefore, if they just stick to the simple rules, 46%, unchill filtered, natural colour. Don't just say it, state it on the label. Actually say it on the label. And don't hide it away in little tiny gold letters round the back where people need a blooming steampunker. That's a reason I've got a magnifying glass in the bothy, is to read some of the tiny essential information that is virtually invisible on not just the whiskey bottles, but on the containers they come in. By the way, there's no need for containers now. Want sustainability? Stop wasting our time with creating waste by charging us for superfluous, unnecessary containers. It's not a good look, but it's a habit that distilleries can't break because they know that it works with the passive consumer. And it's still a relatively, although it's very much expanding and very much global, you have this expanding pool of genuine whiskey enthusiasts, big spenders, super reliable, will turn up for the distillery visits, even when they're getting some really condescending, misinformational statements. I'll give you an example for this. Every time someone at a distillery says, Scotch whiskey is made of 3 simple ingredients, pure water and simple yeast and malted barley. This is a lie. It is a complete fabricated lie, and yet they persist in dishing it out. You make spirit can be arguably be seen to be made from 3 simple ingredients, which frankly aren't that simple. But whiskey has got cask extract in it. That's another ingredient. Why aren't they mentioning it? Why are they lying, blatantly lying? It doesn't come across well. The average consumer who just happens to be on a tour bus and they've shoehorned in a distillery visit and they're just going to buy a wee tartan scarf and a wee card and have some tea and a scone in the shop if it's open. They're quite happy with that. They might pick up a miniature just to have for New Year, but that's as much as their spend's going to be. They're not bothered about the fact that whiskey's made from 3 simple ingredients. Nonsense. But for the informed whiskey customer to go along and get that sort of fabricated BS, it's got to stop. The industry needs to upgrade itself. And unfortunately, it is very sluggish in doing so. And there's new distilleries. People are coming in with the money, with enthusiasm. If they don't get the spirit right, and if they don't have solid cask investment policy, they're going nowhere. So have a look at Isle of Rassay. It's going everywhere. It's quietly sustaining, building up its reputation over the longer term very nicely, whilst others are, and I'm not going to name names, but when you've got a new distillery, a small distillery, bottling at 44.3%, for some bizarre, wacky reason, with a dreadful little uninformational label. Frankly, they're kidding themselves. They're just basically showing that they don't know what they're doing and they're not best prepared for the future. And then to top it all off, you make an inquiry at the distillery, can I buy a cask of whiskey? Yeah, sure you can. 15 grand. 15 grand? Nonsense. Absolute nonsense. That smacks of greed. And distilleries, there's the ones that get it right, just like in the past, they'll survive, they'll make it. But Scotch whisky better watch itself, because there's whiskies coming from other countries now, which in their own way are equally as good. And I'll just mention India in passing. It's not just Amrut anymore, or Paul John. You've got Trini, you've got Rampur, and you've got many, many more. And it does concern me, and you'd certainly witness this if you were attending a Keepers of the Quake moment at Blair Castle. Heaven forbid. They really take themselves very, very seriously without really earning it.
A couple of things just while it's fresh in my mind. Thank you, Ralfy. There is, I think people are having some trouble with the chat tonight. It seems to be blocking them or something. There's something going on there. Apologies for that. I think it must be coming from YouTube, from their end of things. And the other thing is, my camera did go a bit blurry. Your eyesight hasn't gone funny. It probably will come back. It tends to do that sometimes. It's just, I don't know why. Maybe where I'm sitting or whatever it is. I could probably footer about with it, but I'll not do it right now. So we're sort of, here's where I'm seeing it from for now. And I'm going to jump in with this because I feel on a daily basis that I have to. Vin, you've spoken about English. Ralfy, you've spoken about Scotch. I can't not speak about Irish whiskey and where I think it's going. And you already mentioned it, Ralfy. I mean, we have this traditional pot still. That's ours. It's not that nobody in the world can make it. There's no real laws to say nobody else is allowed to make it. There's great pot still come from Tasmania. There's a good pot still out there in America. It's just that it's a bit more difficult to make. It's a bit more, there's a bit more faff with it, with the unmalted barley, etc., and the use of enzymes and all that sort of thing. We'll not deep dive into that right now, but in my opinion, all new Irish distilleries should be making pot still because it's ours. It's traditional to us. It's something that if nobody else is doing it, grasp what is yours and make it your own. Cask initiatives work in Scotland, in my opinion. I've openly said it in the past, and I will continue to say it. In Ireland, they're scalping. They're just charging far too much. There's people out there plaguing the life out of poor people to buy casks, and this is to drive this. And what this is one that really frustrates me. I know you were saying, Ralfy, about Irish distillers, and they do, and this frustrates me as well. Sourcing and basically just labeling it under their own whiskey. It's always annoyed me, but they're going to do it. There's nothing we can do about that. But it's their cask initiatives to so a distillery, and I've seen this happening, a distillery who does not even have planning permission selling casks. And that frustrates the life out of me. So they're basically selling people a promise. That's all they're doing. And I just don't like that. I don't agree with it, especially whenever they're selling it for a premium price. So you haven't produced anything, but yet you're saying here you will have a barrel of our whiskey whenever it's produced. Well, it could be crap. As a matter of fact, it probably will be crap. Why would I buy it? You know, but people are.
That's a strong sentiment. Hey, you should be backing up your local team there. Yeah, it's the problem is that it's unlikely that real crap will be produced, but it's far easier actually to make just featureless, soft, generic whiskey, and hopefully people's psychology will fill in the gaps when you're talking it up at the masterclass.
See, this is the biggest issue that I have. This has always been the biggest issue I have. The horse manure that has been fed to people and I hear that because I work in a whiskey shop, I hear this day and daily. Yes. People coming in and coming off of this to me. And then I'm considered grumpy when I go, no, you're wrong. Yes, but we heard, no, well, you're wrong. And we heard this. Yeah, that's wrong as well. Everything that you've heard is mostly lies. If we want this to progress, the sad thing is then that I find myself, I'm hearing Roy's voice in my head. You're an evangelist. Evangelize about whiskey. Don't be cross with these people. They're only repeating what they've been told. And I keep hearing that. And to me, that's actually a good, that can make for a good future if I could just stop being humpy about the whole bloody thing and say, right, well, if I can educate these people rather than telling them where they're wrong. Well, I'm telling them where they're wrong. Obviously, I'm telling them what the right answer is. But that's what it is. It couldn't be doing the future of whiskey any harm. People like us spreading the word. If there's going to be a future there, in a world where YouTube, so this is actually us coming back to what this is about, technically, whiskey tubers. I certainly wouldn't be doing what I was doing if it wasn't for you two. Vin first, you second, Ralfy. I'm not putting you second.
Same with the knock-on effect there. I wouldn't be doing it if it wasn't for Ralfy. So
yeah. So it's a world that we live in could be driving whiskey forward. It should be driving whiskey forward, and hopefully will be driving whiskey forward.
Well, actually, it definitely is. I can tell you that. Do not underestimate the value of our collective contribution. I'll give you a very good illustrative example. It is now being seriously discussed in political circles, and I'm not talking about politicians. They're just there to provide the theatre. The senior civil servants about sending the promotion of alcohol the same way as cigarettes. In other words, this is particularly pertinent to Ireland, of course, because it tends to kind of bow to the overlords in Brussels, frankly. And what you have is the people who sustained very generous gold plate pensioned careers from banning cigarette advertising, promotion, and all the rest of it need to keep themselves in a job. So they're going to move on to alcohol, because alcohol is dangerous and it destroys marriages, and alcoholism is a terrible thing. No mention, by the way, that sugar causes a huge amount of health problems, and a lot of prescription medication can be really quite dangerous. But this focus is on alcohol, because alcohol's an easy target. I mean, have you got time for a brief story here? Because there's a historical precedent for this. People look back at Prohibition in the United States and think that it was all about the temperance movement trying to shut down all this violent, abusive, aggressive behavior from drunken, primarily, men. What never gets mentioned is the fact that the temperance movement in the 1920s in the USA was financed by the oil company, right? Global Oil. And at this moment in time, Henry Ford was producing his Model T. You could have any color you wanted so long as it was black. But, and this is the bit they never mention, he gave you a choice of engines. You could have the super clean, zero emission, highly efficient alcohol engine. Or you could have the dirty, smoky, polluting, noisy, oil spewing petrol engine, because the oil industry was really struggling to find a way to sell its product. It hadn't taken control of the pharmaceutical industry yet and started to synthesize the oil into all the modern pharmaceutical prescription. Plastic wasn't really much of a thing back in the 1920s. My goodness, they've certainly caught up with promoting that, despite perfectly viable options. But temperance and prohibition, it was basically to shut down the alcohol business, not so much for personal consumption, but as a fuel, one of the most efficient, effective biofuels there is. And this was an attack, and it's easy to attack the alcohol industry because you can always throw out the idiot who gets drunk, falls about in the streets, and slaps up his family. It's almost a parody. It's interesting that when you look at antiquated whiskey adverts, they always present the drunk as having a cheery face, a cherry nose, almost a clown caricature of, this is the sort of drunk who wouldn't even say boo to a goose. He's just such a cheery, chirpy chappy. Let him get on with his whiskey and his drinking. So you have this little kind of subtle messaging going on there, which translates into the modern world when you want to shut down bad behavior. They're going back to maybe 10 years ago, the football hooligans drunk, the Chads on their spring breaks around the USA, they're drunk. These bad people doing bad things, alcohol's involved. So they don't want to shut down the alcohol because the authorities are getting too much money out the customs revenue. You know, they'd shut it down tomorrow, but they're fully loaded in for the money. It's all about the money. But secondly, they need the revenue it generates. £5 billion last year from food and beverage, or beverage alone, was exported out of Britain, primarily gin and blended whiskey. But malts are following on behind. Malts are getting further and further to Kazakhstan, to Turkmenistan, even in Dubai. My goodness, and people are finding it. They're seeing it. Unlike the old days, they're not buying any magazines. And I know I'm kind of drifting with my response here, but I'm just going to go with it anyway. They're not buying the magazines. The adverts in magazines will soon disappear. The pseudo-prohibitionists will want to cut out all marketing, all adverts, all bill poster boards, TV marketing, TV adverts, because it's alcohol and it's bad for you. And that will throw the center of attention for conversation, for marketing conversation, onto social media. And whilst we continue, we're going to become, as a group of enthusiasts, even more important to the global spirits industry, not just Scotch, than we are now. And I must say the whiskey industry in particular is very, very lucky with the quality of content they're getting, even when they're not happy with some of the opinions. You look at other social media sites, sports, for example, comedy and fitness, and just finance. My goodness, the amount of frauds, rip-offs, and all the rest of it from finfluencers that's happening at the moment beggars belief. But I tell you, it's a relatively safe haven for the industry. An authentic, original, informed online conversation where people forget the magazines, no more adverts to be seen, straight onto the mobile device, press go. Where's it going to take you? It's going to take you to where we're all hanging out separately and collectively. And my estimate is that last year, online activity generated more than £10 million domestically alone for the sale of single malt whiskey alone.
Well, I mean, the thing we do know, as I said, we could have got statistically involved in this. I could have got analytical about it, as I said earlier, pie charts, etc. It's growing. Sales are growing. Production's growing. Whiskey is growing. That much we do know without having to get too analytical about the whole thing. We've seen the numbers. We've all seen how, and I mean, even just looking at production alone, the amount of litres of pure alcohol these distilleries are putting out is growing and growing and growing. Bushmills last year went from 5 million litres to 11 million litres with the opening of their extension. That's huge for a distillery that is known for its blends, of which the grain element they can't make, which to me didn't make sense at all. I mean, you know, at the end of the day, you can more than double your amount of malt you're putting out, but when you can't make the grain element, which is the part that's making you the money from your blends, but that's an argument. I just have to get the feet into Bushmills once a day. I'm contractually obliged to do so. But so there's an awful lot of nonsense that is going on in the background that to me is working against the future for whiskey. But at the same time, the growth alone would tell us that it's huge. And as I said earlier, that I actually got a question from a friend of mine recently who's not into whiskey really, but trying to find his way in there. And I always think this is, yet again, working in the shop, I get questions like this. Like, what do you think of Teeling? Narrow it down. You know, there's about 60 different expressions there. Narrow that down. What are you going to say that? What do you think of Bushmills? Narrow it down. A friend asked me the other day, what do you think of Japanese whiskey? And it just made me think, well, every country in this world is I was going to say capable or guilty, either or, of good, bad, and ugly. Every distillery in every country of this world is capable of good, bad, and ugly. They always will be. It's finding, I'm sure, if we look into the future, obviously somebody's been telling these guys that it is growing. They haven't just been looking at the schematics. They haven't just been looking at what's going on. You wouldn't start a distillery nowadays if you didn't think you were going to make money out of it in the future. So there's obviously either enough of us, or they are planning on making something that's going to aim toward the next generation. So that's something, the next generation that we almost started with, Finn. And my 15-year-old son, I don't like talking about much about the next generation where alcohol's involved, but sometimes we have to. My 15-year-old son and 13-year-old daughter, it's got to a point that if I pour a glass of whiskey and my wife and I are nosing it and maybe having a sip of it, they're curious to know what it smells like and what it tastes like. And and this amazed me that they can nose this and go, oh, I can smell. Is that licorice? Is that? And they're not offended by it. I remember being that age and thinking that's bogging. I can't smell that stuff. And it was even, but the thing, it was like beer as well. Even whenever you were drinking beer when you were younger, it just didn't taste right. So I'm actually hoping that this is a desensitized. It's not necessarily a desensitized. That's going too far, but not offended by the stronger and more. It's more. Bring it on. Bring on the flavors and the smells. We want to enjoy that and appreciate it. But I'm hoping that the future, this is the one thing that I really hope for, that, and I know, Ralfy, this is something that you've been very vocal about throughout the years, that it's about the quality and not the quantity, and that we put alcoholism behind us. That it would be lovely to just draw a line through alcoholism and say that it doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah. And
go forward, and that people can drink for the purposes of quality and not to get drunk.
Yes, drinking with responsibility. And to add to what you're saying, that the younger generation, if they are interested in alcohol and they have other options, they will be looking for quality. The worst thing a distillery can do is produce bland stuff. And you see this, unfortunately, in the mindset of some distillers who, when they produce new make spirit, they use the yield of alcohol as their main point of reference rather than the yield of flavor. And if you've got a strong flavored spirit, it can go a long, long way in a reasonable cask. But if you've got bland spirit, an unkind cask will soon cut it down.
You can't polish a turd. I was saying earlier on about producing, about distilleries producing crap. I have tasted in recent years some very, very average to poor new make spirits from some of these newer distilleries.
Yeah,
that is not sustainable going forward, because it doesn't matter how good quality, and we haven't even touched on casks yet, supply of casks, and we maybe will in a minute before we decide to go anywhere else. But it doesn't matter how good your casks are. We both know this. Everybody in this chat knows this. If your new make spirit is average to poor, what are you going to do with it? You need to start with a good basis. It needs to be a decent, at least, new make spirit going into those casks to benefit from that wood.
Yes. Where you get more flavor, you always get more intensity of sensation. Where you get less yield of flavor, it suppresses the sweet, salt, sour, savory, and bitter sensations. And the whiskey loses its dynamic. And on the subject of casks, for Ireland, there's huge potential in using non-oak casks and using inner staves, both of which are permitted, but not in Scotland. And I don't know if you remember an early experiment by Compass Box in their earlier and highly enthusiastic days when they were producing the best labels in the whiskey scene for their bottlings. They brought out a range called the Canto range, and also a bottling called Spice Tree. And the thing about Spice Tree is it contained an inner stave. Now, inner stave's been used in the French wine industry in particular for well over 300 years. All it is a piece of really active, well toasted wood that is either just thrown into the cask or screwed into the barrel head with a stainless steel or sometimes even a brass screw. And it imparts that additional extra flavour, which is not necessarily coming out of the wood. And the French wine industry would do this because their wine isn't in the cask for that long. It's only in there just to basically get tempered and experience a little bit of oxidization and get rid of the harsher elements of the new make of from the fruits. But it's always been used in the Scotch whisky industry. But when Spice Tree appeared, it was allegedly, because you never know the real facts, because there's that much jiggery pokery goes on. It was in contravention of the traditions of making Scotch whisky. So the Scotch Whisky Association, bless them, basically instructed Compass Box not to do it again. You can't do this. You can't use inner staves. Why? It's not traditional. What absolute nonsense. And it's not an isolated example, but it's fascinating. You know, we're not just drinking whiskey. Because of the internet, we're sitting in the front row seats of a theatre and we're watching the whiskey show going around us, and occasionally we're participating in it. We're invited up on stage to act a little part in one of the scenes, which we're reasonably experienced in doing now. But this brings me to, I'm going to conclude in this, is that back in the 1980s, early 1990s, you bought your bottle of whiskey and you went home and you shut up and you drank it. How things have changed now. It doesn't matter. You can be up in the space station and they're pouring out a wee tipple. Oh, let's see what they have to say on it on YouTube. Or what's this particular blog assessment of it? Or if people just do a general sweeping search engine scan in Bing or DuckGogo or whatever, and then we appear. And when they're sipping a whiskey, which is generally alone, particularly if they're not in a bar where they're going to get distracted, they'll say, hang about, that's interesting, I didn't know that, and I'm not sure what I'm smelling, and I'm not sure what I'm tasting, but now I'm listening to these guys. Now I'm getting my bearings. And these guys are saying, take your time, and they're reassuring me that I'm not some sort of numb nut because I don't have the inner workings of the subtle nuances to access this cask strength 12-year-old Bunnahabhain. I don't have to worry about that. I tell you what, I'm really enjoying this. And while we're at it, I can see these guys are relatively sober. They're not falling about laughing. If I want to find the videos where some arsehole is going to neck an entire bottle of Jack Daniels, unfortunately, YouTube still show these videos, and they shouldn't. They should cancel them because it's highly irresponsible and highly dangerous, even when they're faking it with cold tea, which some of them do, because they just want the views and they want the kicks. But here we are. We'll have a few whiskies. We don't start cussing and swearing. We don't start, abusing and being offensive. It is a very civil, cosmopolitan, inclusive environment. And this is something else that the whiskey industry is simply at the moment incapable of connecting with. And the one challenge I would send to any distillery, next time you're at a whiskey festival, send someone round from the back of the table to the front of the table and just get them to, when the people turn up and say, well, what do you think? What do you think of this? What do you think? Have you tried that one? And what do you think of this? And what's the best whiskey at the show? And what's been the worst whiskey at the show? Deep dive it.
There's nothing I enjoy more than introducing Irish whiskey brand ambassadors to Scotch whiskey, because they all, it's now to say they all, that would be cheeky. Actually, I've made an awful lot of friends in the Irish whiskey industry, and it's amazing those who are willing to learn, who are willing to admit that they don't really, I mean, I'm saying this going, get you sort of thing, who am I at the same time? But who I am was somebody who was willing to learn about whiskey from around the world. Whereas an awful lot of these newer brand ambassadors are basically going, here's who you work for, here's what we drink, get out there and sell it. And it's not their fault, that's what they do. And yet again, this isn't us sort of straying way off the what we're talking about here. Because to me, these brand ambassadors, know your enemy. Know who you're out there trading against, because they're out there. I mean, every distillery's out there to sell its own. Just to be there and be a script reader and just tell people here, our whiskey's the best in the world, when next week you'll work for a different distillery and come in and tell us that their whiskey's crap. Now this whiskey that I work for is the best in the world.
That does happen.
Yeah. So I love, as I say, and I've, as I say, I've got to know a few people, and I'm actively giving them samples of whiskey all the time and saying, try this. If you know a good whiskey, I mean, anybody to tell me that they've, when I hear about these sourced blends of a name of a whiskey that I have never heard of, and people are coming and going, that's the best whiskey I've ever tasted, I'm saying, well, you've never actually tasted good whiskey then, if you think that's the best whiskey you've ever tasted. It maybe is the best whiskey you've ever tasted. So let me introduce you to something better, and we'll drive this forward. Because if we don't drive this forward, then it will start to flounder a bit. And I'm not, yet again, that maybe sounds a bit pretentious that we're saying that we are sort of driving this forward. All we're doing is trying to help people on their path, on their journey, and say, well, you know, here's what we think you should maybe try. You know, try this, try that, try whatever. And what happens? And you said it a while ago, Ralfy. You've said it, Vin. What happens is that people latch on to us and say, well, I liked what he liked, I didn't like what he liked, so therefore our palates must align a little. I love nothing more than when somebody that we, I'm sure we've all got a few of those people that we know that are friends on, and we've made friends through YouTube, and I love nothing more whenever they come back, one of them comes back and says, you said you didn't like that. Actually, I did like that one. Because we still want people to have to be individual about this thing. We still want them to have I was going to come dressed like that tonight as well. I didn't. That would have been embarrassing.
Covered, little brat.
I've locked my cat out as well.
I'm prepared. This is Fluffy.
Hello, Fluffy.
Oh.
I don't have any problem with mice in the bothy anymore. Unless they actually bring them dead and just leave them tucked in the corner where I start to smell them a few weeks later. Right, you little brat. Yes, you. You're holding up the show.
That's lack of it. That's looking at that and going, that looks like lack of attention. But I would say Fluffy gets enough attention from the looks of it.
He's him and his big brother Billy. There's a couple of standard moggies. I had a mouse problem in the house. I brought the cats in. Now I don't have a mouse problem in the house. The mouse problem is outside the house here in the bothy. But you know, they've got me around their they've got me thoroughly wound around their tails.
Yeah.
So I'm the hired. I'm not even hired. I'm staff, right? See, dogs have owners, cats have staff. But there you go.
Absolutely.
Good on you.
All right, Fluffy. Are you going away now? Thank you.
That's it.
Yeah, it works.
Services rendered.
Yes, for the moment.
Quickly, just before, because we're an hour and 20 in. I don't want this going on all night. We didn't actually mention cask supply, quality cask supply, and you know, is that going to be a question in the future? I would imagine it is, because we already know that they're struggling a little. Prices, you know, you were mentioning prices earlier on, Ralfy. The price of casks is rocketing. That's got to be something that's going to be troublesome for them.
When a few years ago, because I'm in the unique position that I've sold quite a bit of my whiskey collection and I bought some casks, So I'm getting the practical experience of managing casks and bringing them forward, bringing them on, developing the whiskey. And I've found that a few are ready. Some they just need time, more time, significantly more time. They'll be ready when they're 22, 23 years old. It's just the nature of the cask. You can, if you've got experience, you can kind of suss it out after a couple of samples on between 2 years. So you can start to map out the progress of a cask. But some of them, the cask's going nowhere. And I bought 2 barrels of rum from Liverpool, funnily enough. They were stored in an old warehouse down at the Mersey and Foursquare. And I had them shipped up to Scotland, tried them, and I thought, it's perfectly competent, but it's not sparkling. So I invested in 2 Madeira casks. This is before pandemic lockdown. Even then, you were £700 a cask, and now they're simply unavailable. I think that the whiskey industry's got a serious challenge on how to repurpose wood policy without going to outrageous expense of a whole load of new casks where the cost of freighting these casks is extortionately expensive, the damage of the casks in transit if they're whole, the condition of these casks when they arrive, because they can get damaged in transit. With the cost involved is astronomical. So what's the other option? Well, inner staves. Oh, wait a minute. The Scotch Whisky Association has banned inner staves. But wait a minute. The Scotch Whisky Association can ban what it likes. It's not the law. It's not the legal definitive authority on what Scotch whisky is. That is in a constitutional decision through Parliament. So there is absolutely, and I would say to distilleries, even if you have to drop the name Scotch whisky, start getting creative with inner staves and don't use oak, use other woods, spruce, for example, pine, for example. You can get some fabulous results with that. If you look, for example, at the rum maker Mount Gay, they brought out an Andean oak rum a couple of 3-4 years ago. My goodness, nectar of the gods. So you had this high altitude aromatic oak, which they basically got a few casks made up. But even if they just got them as plain planks, rendered planks, toasted them, charred them lightly, and put them inside their existing rum casks, it would have made a significant difference. It's the same with Mizunara. The cost of a new make Mizunara cask empty is something like £8,000 now. It's just because it's Japanese and it's just expensive because that's what Japan does. But if you just got just the sheets of wood imported, cut it up by hand, toasted it in an oven, into your cask, you're going to get an influence. And if it means that you don't call your whiskey Scotch whisky, you call it Scottish spirit or local spirit, matured local spirit, can you imagine the reaction of the online whiskey community rushing to try that?
See, that's the thing. It's funny you should say that, Ralfy, because there's an awful lot of emphasis put on the word whiskey.
Yeah.
So Ireland now is back selling poaching again. And well, say back selling it again. We were never allowed to sell it in the past, but now we are. It's now a legal spirit. And it's growing larger and larger and larger. And now the thing about it is, I'm saying back selling it again, remembering that before 1916 and the Immature Spirits Act, a lot of Irish whiskey was poaching. Really, it was stored in barrels. It wasn't matured in barrels. They were only keeping it in there because there was nowhere else to keep it. So it was very youthful stuff. And so this is now growing again. This is becoming a very popular thing. Scotland doesn't really have that thing. So this is something yet again that Ireland we're sort of marketing, and it's a spirit. It's not so, but what that poaching is allowing is whiskey producers to release their new make spirit in bulk,
Yes.
rather than gin. Let's face it, there's too many of them starting to put out vodkas, which what is the point, in my opinion, because it's in the spirit world, it's a flavorless spirit. They're producing it to strip the flavor out. What's the point in everybody releasing vodka? That to me is going nowhere. But this, as I say, this poaching thing. So you have a very good point there, Ralphie. I mean, if in the bend of a rule or the change of a view, it doesn't have to be a ruling. Somebody else can come up with this idea and just say, let's just release something else.
Yeah, and
ideally, whiskey.
Yeah, and ideally, you want the Scotch Whisky Association to spit the dummy, attempt to ban it, and then your product will fly off the shelves.
And maybe they rethink what they were thinking.
Maybe.
Vin, any thoughts on casks and the supply of casks and how is that going to be sustainable? Somebody actually made a comment, Mark made a comment about, the amount of single malt that's now being made in America. So that bourbon law of the New York cask doesn't extend to that. So
yeah, I mean, so I was just talking to some guys about this recently. I went to a distillery. I won't say who, just in case their opinion doesn't want to be spelled out. But we were talking about casks and cask supply. Like, the trendy thing at the moment is to have 1 million different releases under 1 million different cask finishes, and that's great because it differentiates them and whatever. But they were saying basically that sort of trend is getting a bit saturated now. And I don't know about you guys, but my palate is certainly coming full circle back round to ex-bourbon. And ex-bourbon really is the backbone of the whiskey industry. We struggle to make trees straight enough and tall enough to create casks of our own over here. So the fact that they sell them, I don't know what they are now, but they used to be $250 a pop for ex-bourbon barrels. I know Ralph would be able to tell me different if they're more now. But if that industry doesn't change, and I don't think it will, I think bourbon, they'll relax the rules maybe a little, but the bourbon rules are important to the American economy, to keep it in-house and to keep that whole supply chain going. And I think that will still extend over here. So my point in a long way is really that I think we'll see the kind of revival almost of the ex-bourbon, hopefully in first fill and less refill. But I think that's where we're going to be heading. More and more is going to be excellent quality ex-bourbon barrels. So I don't think we need to worry about that too much, but like you said, we do need to be careful. I don't want to pay £100 for a bottle of whiskey just because it's got a fancy cask, when a traditional cask would do just as well, I think.
Here's another question. Thank you, Vin. Here's another question that I had in the back of my mind earlier on and forgot to ask. Are the collectors, because this was another thing that sort of drove this forward for me. The secondary market's always a good place to look. I always think the secondary market's a good place to gauge where whiskey's at the moment.
Yeah.
And the secondary market at the moment is in a huge dip. There certainly is, where I can see it from in Ireland anyway. And to the point where I heard recently, and yet again, like you said there, Vin, I'll not name any names, I'll not name any places, but there was almost the word panic being used about the future, because it was at a bit of a dip at the minute. Now, collectors who, and this is one that in the whiskey shop, the till loves, but I hate. I don't even like whiskey. I hear that. I don't even like whiskey. But the till loves these people because they spend thousands, because they like a nice wooden box and a nice fancy shaped bottle with a gold trim on it and all that there. And it's just could you not just waste your money on a car, mate, and focused on something else? Is the way I look at that. I do not get this thing. I can't compute it at all, because whiskey is about whiskey. It was somebody made this to be drunk. That's what it's about. And I can't help myself but think that collectors have to be ruining the future of whiskey a little bit, for the simple fact that they are gathering this stuff up for the purpose of selling it on at a later date, to push the price up and up and up and up and up and up. And for every bit that they're selling on and every bit that they're collecting to move on, it's less whiskey for us enthusiasts to ever get the opportunity to drink. Not that we were ever going to buy those bottles in the first place, because as far as I can tell, most of those uber expensive bottles, the whiskey is subpar anyway. It's because for the reason being that it was never made to be drank. It was made to go into a fancy bottle and a fancy box and sold to the next ridiculous
here we go.
millionaire.
Intruder alert.
Is that Sooty?
Bella. It was
Bella.
She was a rescue, so she came with a name.
She's lovely.
Am I going to have to go out and bring the ferret in?
Yeah. To be honest, I just had to open the door because it's getting hot in here with the lights. So I opened the door, and within seconds, the cat was in.
Yes.
Sorry, Jim. Make your last point again, mate.
The cat it wasn't that the cat just ruined it, Vin, but the cat was just the penultimate. That was it. I was done anyway. I was just... My rant was finished.
It's, it's an interesting concept, what we've been talking about tonight, because sustainability is obviously it's all born from the worry that we won't be able to carry on with this. That's why the word even exists. But we've talked a little bit about money and social issues and whatnot. I think the thing I'd want to sort of impress on everybody is that regardless of doom and gloom, it's not going anywhere. There's a few craft people who are a bit too maverick might end up losing their way a little bit and having to close later on. But the big fellas, they're not going anywhere. The whiskey's still going to be around. People are going to still want to drink. The odd single malt might reduce down, but it's exactly the same as what happened the last time it all slumped. Loads of them closed down in Ireland. It all went down to just 3. And, what was it in Campbelltown? There was 21, and then it went down to 3. And it will happen eventually. Hopefully, I'll be an old man by then, and it won't matter to me because I'll just be still drinking what I've got behind me. But yeah, the point is, whiskey's not going anywhere.
Yeah. The original question at the beginning of the conversation was, the future of whiskey, is it sustainable? The answer is simply yes.
Yes.
We like, as part of our in-house conversation, is we like to have a wee worry about this and that. But frankly, we've got nothing to worry about. Anybody, anywhere who wants to go out and just buy at a reasonable, on a budget price, a decent single malt whiskey for £36, they can get a bottle of Glen Scotia double cask, Isle of Arran. They can get a traditional blend, which is amplified, like Maclean's Nose, for example. They can find in the sales, Bunnahabhain 12-year-old down, £25 a bottle. For people on a budget, there is plenty of good whiskey out there. For the speculators, bless them, we get to laugh at them. We get to laugh at their vanity, their lack of basic knowledge on the fact that bling bottles, they'll have to hold on to them, and at some point, if they really need the money and they put them into auction, well, they may be significantly disappointed. But at the moment, in the UK, you can go on to an online whiskey auction, and that bottle of Springbank that you weren't bothered to be queuing up for and going through the faff of trying to collect, trying to get a bottle when it originally came out through the retailers, there it is, sitting, waiting. And if you don't want to pay the money, right beside it is Kilkerran, an absolute banger malt, malted at Springbank. Is malted barley still going to be around? Is it going to be difficult to source? No chance, because with modern agricultural industrial practices and the use of sustainable fertilizers, it's never been easier. What we do look forward to is seeing a bit more of the local barley, indigenous barley, early generation varieties of barley. I know it's harder for the distilleries to work with, but it gives more flavoursome, substantial yields, because modern barley, contemporary industrial barley, is definitely engineered to have a whole load of starch in it, in the kernels, because it's there to deliver high yields of alcohol. And the more high yield in the alcohol, the less the yield in the flavour. And
We live in a modern world.
It's literally at our fingertips. It's never been easier than it is now. And in the future can look after itself. So far, it's been a very good run. And by the way, as a generation of whiskey drinkers, frankly, gentlemen, we've never had it so good. Cheers.
Go on, son.
Cheers.
Well put, Ralfy.
It's not wrong. I mean, in the chat, we're talking about prices a little bit, and it's, taxes are horrendous over here. We know that, but it's just, I constantly say the same thing what Ralfy just said. Yes, all right, we used to be able to get Highland Park 18 for 80 quid, and we can't anymore. Boo hoo. However, for 80 quid, you can still get incredible whiskey. I'm drinking a 35-year-old grain here that's 67, 70 quid. So if you let go of what used to be and isn't anymore, and just go looking, it's out there. There's some good stuff out there.
If you want, I'll give you 3 examples, illustrative examples, for around about 80 quid, give or take a tenner. Usually you got to add a tenner, but around about £80. Loch Lomond 18-year-old, Glenmoray 18-year-old. Either guys, another suggestion to make a third option?
Deanston 18's not a million miles away from there. Like,
there you go. 3 bangers.
And that's, the thing, but this is the bit that you name 2 distilleries there, Ralfy, that always come up to me, Glenmoray and Loch Lomond. And when I look at what those 2 distilleries are putting out at the price at what they're putting it out at, I look to the other distilleries and go, what the hell are you guys doing? What are they doing that they can afford to put this whiskey out at that quality, at that price, but yet you're charging almost double that for the same, for the same age, the same, and it's not, but as far as I can tell, you're not doing anything that different than they're doing.
Yeah, basically, when they're loading up the prices, they're taking the piss. Dalmore, look no further. Great example. 25-year-old whiskey at 40%, heavily chill filtered, and they're asking what for the 18-year-old? What, £300 a bottle? Good. Thanks for providing a laugh, Dalmore. I certainly won't be buying your product, but frankly, great entertainment. And as for the suckers that buy it, there's one born every minute. Good luck to them.
Exactly. Gents, I'm going to say thank you, and I'm delighted tonight, because you've made me laugh. You've cheered me up. And when I say you made me laugh, you made me laugh for the right reason. I wasn't laughing at you. Because this, and the feeling I've got from the chat, and I know there was a lot of people struggling. Vin, thank you very much. Vin's just added to the bottle fund. Cheers, my friend. From the chat that I've watched, everybody's enjoyed this as much as the chat. There was people getting blocked out of the chat, which I do hope there was nothing. I don't think I was doing anything wrong here myself. I think it was just something maybe in the YouTube worms end of things. We ended up doing what I thought we would end up doing. We just rant about whiskey. This was why I didn't want anything. I never liked anything scripted about these sort of things. It's just because your answers, your feelings, your etc. come from what people are saying to you. It's better to be natural. And I think, as I'm not saying we're not necessarily 3 different generations, but there's a gap of enough between us to know that we've all been around slightly different times, only slightly.
That's very kind, Jim.
Thanks, Ralfy. I was talking about the difference between me and Vin there, but
Hey, I'm older than I look, man. I'll tell you that. I'm older than I look.
But the thing about it is we appreciate our whiskey. The thing about it is that we're not, I said it earlier on about Ardent American or Ardent Who not breaking molds. We're not breaking molds here. We're preaching to the converted here. Anybody that's in this chat, I would suggest, is on the same page as us anyway. But it's good to hear your views on where you see the future of whiskey, because I think along the same lines that we're safe. We're not, but I didn't actually think about it the way you put it there, Ralfy, and I have to agree with you. But before I do, Codger, who, I don't know, has that also added to the bottle fund, that technically we're on the pig's back now, because these distilleries who aren't producing, and these owners who aren't producing for the mass consumers, are producing for us, and they are competing with each other to make a product of a quality that we want. They want to win us over. And what I love, and he was in the chat earlier on, and I'm not saying this because he's a friend. Well, I am saying it because he's a friend, but I'm also saying it because he's in the industry. And Michael Henry was in there earlier on, and I'm convinced that Loch Lomond changed their patter a little as a result of Michael being a big player in the whiskey community. In that, and he's not alone. I'm only saying it because it was Michael that was in earlier on. I'm sure there's maybe others, but in that they are listening. I'm convinced that some of them are listening, and they are changing their ways. They are taking things like, I mean, a good example was, if you look at older bottlings of Loch Lomond, smooth to perfection. They took that off as a result of us going, look, that word just doesn't make any sense to anybody. Smooth. Yeah. So, and they did that. And sometimes they listen to us, I'm convinced of. And to me, if they continue to do so, I think the future for whiskey for us is looking good.
Yeah, it's all about the money, Jim. And we've got money.
Of course it is.
All they have to do is persuade us. Such a simple equation.
Of course it is. I mean, that's the thing. They need the money coming in. We don't want to be scalped. We want to be able to get a good quality product for the right price. And when we see what some people can do, and I said it a minute ago about Loch Lomond and Glenmorangie, we see what some people can put out as compared to others just going the other end of that. We're just going to end up keeping, and rightly so, we'll just buy what's right for the right price, and we will preach about it to other people and say, here's what you should be buying.
Very important comment that we communicate the caliber of conversation through the informality of the online enthusiasts is absolutely priceless to the Scotch whisky industry. And in fact, the less they interfere, the better. As part of the irony, we should never underestimate the clout that we have, and that quietly, for some forward thinking businesses, they might not even acknowledge it, but they're certainly listening to what we're saying. They're certainly monitoring our content, our discourse, and furthermore, then they're dropping down below the videos and they're looking at the general consensus of comments left by people, because, they can go out and spend tens of hundreds of thousands of pounds on a consultant who will tell them what they're being paid to, what they perceive that they're being paid to provide, and is not necessarily honest, but literally a little bit of time and a laptop, and they will get the most priceless feedback that they could possibly get, and totally free.
Agreed. Gentlemen, it hasn't only been a pleasure to spend the last hour and 45 minutes in your company. It's been an absolute honor.
Cheers.
Please stay in the background. I will speak to you in a moment. Ralfy,
Uh-oh.
thank you. No, I was just going to say thank you. I'm just going to drop you out.
I'm just teasing because I'm like that.
I'll speak to you in a moment, sir.
Speak to you in a
Cheers.
moment.
Vin, thank you for starting this initiative, and listen, thank you for tonight, buddy. As I say, I'm just going to put it out there. You were my first.
I mean, and I don't even remember it, but I'll take it.
I'll speak to you in a moment, my friend. Thank you.
Cheers.
Yeah, what I meant by that, he was my first. He was the first. Whenever it was YouTube, So he was the first guy. He was the first guy. Understand people. He was the first person whenever I didn't know that people were reviewing whiskey. He was anyway. I'll not dig a deeper hole than I've already dug for that one. Folks, thank you for joining in tonight. I hope, as I said, that any issues with chat was on YouTube's behalf and not mine. If it was mine, I apologize. But apart from that, thank you for joining in. It's been an absolute pleasure. There was some great chat. I was watching the chat going on in the background. I know I sometimes don't dive into it as much as I should. I just struggle with more than one thing at a time. But it was good to see so many of you in. And that's pretty much me. The future, I would suggest of whiskey is rosy. I think we're all right. As the guys said, there'll always be something for us. There'll always be something. We started with those blends. I would like to think, and I still suggest to people that if you're going to start a whiskey journey, start at the beginning. Don't jump in at expensive stuff. To start at the beginning, start with the blends, and work your way up. We'll never be without whiskey as long as those blends and all are there. And these, even be it the bigger ones, etc., will always be around producing whiskey, and it'll always be there for us. So there you go. I can't really say an awful lot more than that. A huge thank you, as I said, to all of you for being in. Thank you to my two guests tonight, Ralfy and Vin. An absolute pleasure to spend time in their company. And I will hopefully be back with a live stream of my own at some point soon. But until then, look after yourselves. Here's to your good health. Cheers.